In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this galaxy render in Blender. And so the entire galaxy is going to be one procedural material. And if you'd like to purchase the tutorial project files and help support the channel, you can get that with the links in the video description on my Gumroad and Patreon. Now you can do this tutorial in the Eevee rendering engine if you want to. It looks pretty similar in Cycles and Eevee. Here you can see the difference between Cycles and Eevee. I'm going to be doing the final render with Cycles because I think it just looks nicer, but you definitely could use Eevee. Now during the video, I am going to be sometimes switching to Eevee so that you can just see it in the viewport a little bit better because it is kind of laggy in the viewport in Cycles. So I'll be switching back and forth between Eevee and Cycles, but in the end I will render it with Cycles for the final render. And as well as creating the procedural galaxy with the shader nodes, I'm also going to be going into the world nodes and we're going to create this procedural background. So we're going to create the procedural stars in the background with some little blue bits kind of to look like nebula. Now, as well as making the procedural galaxy, at the end of the video, I'll show you how to join it together into a node group with many custom settings so you can customize the look of the galaxy. And if you purchase the finished tutorial project files, then you'll already get this custom node group so you can customize the look of the galaxy. So if I just hit the tab key to go into the node group and then just scroll out here, you can see here are all the node group settings. So this is what we'll be creating to create the galaxy, but then I'll show you how to create it as a custom node group. So for everyone who's purchased the project files, I'm going to go over all the custom node group settings to show you how you can customize the look of the galaxy. So because this galaxy has so many custom values, I've created them with these panels. So you can just click on the arrows here to open up the panels and access all the settings. And so that the viewport is a little bit faster, I'm going to change the render engine over to Eevee. So you can see in Eevee, the viewport is going to be a little bit faster. And then also if I click here on the drop down on the viewport shading, I'm going to disable the viewport compositing just because I want to show you how the galaxy looks like without the compositing so you don't have all those extra glares and things. So I'm going to now open up the galaxy panel. And so for this, we have the overall scale. So you can see I can make it bigger and smaller. So the galaxy is just added to this very simple cube here. So you can change the size of it to make it bigger and smaller. Then there's also a visibility value. So if you want to see less of the galaxy, you can kind of turn it down and now the galaxy is less visible, or you can make it very visible. Then there's also this cool spin warp value. So if I turn this, you can see the entire thing is going to spin a lot, or it's going to spin not very much. Now, if I turn the spin warp to a higher value, it's only going to spin in the center, but then kind of on the edges, it's going to be more noisy. Or if I turn the spin warp down to a small value, you can see it's going to spin and warp a lot on the outside, but then the center is just going to be a little bit more noisy and less distorted. Then there's also the ring size. So if I turn this up, you can see there's going to be a lot more detail and be a lot more rings. Or I can turn the ring size down and there's going to be not as much detail and it's also not going to spin as much. And then all of these other settings are the base noise texture. So there's a scale value just for that noise. So you can make it really detailed. There's also a detail value if you want to control that. And then there's also the roughness value, which is more detail. Then there's also the lacunarity value. So if I turn this down, you can see that looks pretty cool. There's more open spaces, or I can turn it up. And then also there's this distortion if I just want to make it a bit more distorted. So let's close the galaxy panel and we're going to open up the colors panel. So you can see we have a transparent color. So this you actually want to leave as fully black, because if you turn it up to any kind of color, then you can see the entire cube, which is the original object. So just keep it black and that will be the transparency. So then there's color 1, so that's going to be the very outward color. So it's blue. Then you can see there's also color 2 here, which is kind of that pinkish. And then color 3 is kind of a red color. And then also color 4 is another kind of red color. So you can see each one of these kind of control like a ring of color. Then there's color 5, which is an orangey color. And then there's color 6, which is kind of an orangey kind of brown. And then there's color 7, which is kind of this yellow in the very center. Then there's just a few other settings you can change, like the color hue. So the color here will change all of them at once. The color saturation to make all of them more and less saturated. And then the value, which will just make all of them lighter and darker. So if you turn it down, it's going to be very transparent. Let's close the color panel and we're going to open up the center panel. So the center is just going to be that little white bit in the center. So there's the color for the center, so you can make it more bright or less bright. And you could make it a different color if you want to, but I like keeping it white. And then there's also a size for it. So if you want to make it bigger or smaller, you can just change the size of it. Close the center and we're going to open up the distortion. So there's some different distortion settings. So there's the strength of the distortion. You can see with the strength turned down, it is very circular and it is a much more smooth round galaxy. So that actually does look pretty cool. But if you want to turn up the strength and make it more random, you can do that. Then there is the size of the texture. There's also the detail level, then the roughness, which is another level of detail, then also the lacunarity value. So if I kind of zoom into the edges, you can see what the lacunarity is doing. It's kind of adding this little dots texture. And then it's also the distortion value. So if you kind of want to distort it, you can. So let's close the distortion and we're going to open up the detail. So for the detail, we have similar settings, but for the detail instead. So we have a strength value, so you can make it very detailed or less detailed. So I'll just turn the strength up really strong so you can kind of see it affecting it more. So we have the scale of the detail, then we have the detail value, the roughness detail, the lacunarity detail, and then the distortion detail. But I'll keep these back at their default. So let's close the detail. And then finally, we have the stars. Now these stars are not controlling the stars in the background in the world. These are actually some different stars, maybe like different planets and solar systems and things inside the galaxy. So I can change the scale of the stars. You can see there's little speckles there. So I can change the scale of the stars inside the galaxy. And then there's also the individual star size. So you can see I can make the stars really big or make them very small. And then there's also the color of the stars. So I could maybe make them like a slate blue color. Now what I'm also going to do in the shader editor is click on object and go to world instead. And so in the tutorial, we're also going to be creating this procedural stars background. So I'm just going to hide the nebula, and then let's go here to the viewport shading and turn this on to always. And then I'm just going to switch this back over to cycles so you can see what it will look like in cycles. So you can see we're going to be creating this really cool like star nebula background with all these stars and little bits of blue here and there. So if you'd like to purchase the project files to get the finished Blender file with the customizable node group and the stars nebula background, then you can purchase it with the links in the video description. You can also purchase my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. Now before we jump into the tutorial, there is an add-on which I'm going to be using to help us create the custom node group with all the custom values, and that is this color ramp converter. And this add-on was created by Kylsonn Batista. So it's a completely free add-on and you can download it on his website. So I'll have a link in the video description if you want to download it. So we're going to be using this add-on later in the tutorial to convert all of our color ramp colors into colors that we can actually use outside of a node group. Now this is totally optional, so you don't have to download and install the add-on if you don't want to, but if you don't use the add-on, then you won't be able to add all the color ramp colors as customizable color values. Now Kylsonn also has a video on his YouTube channel where he shows how to use the add-on, so you can definitely check out that video with the link in the description, and be sure to check out his YouTube channel to support him because he makes some really great tutorials. Alright, so here I am in a new scene in Blender version 5.0. My screencast keys will be right down here in the corner if you want to see what buttons I'm pressing. So what I'm going to do is select everything, and I'm just going to delete everything. Then I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add a new cube. Because you can't use the default cube, you have to delete it and then add a new one. So I'm going to scale this cube up by 2 so it's a bit larger, and then I'm going to scale it down on the z-axis by 0.2. So now it's just this nice wide short cube. So I'll hit Ctrl A and I'm going to apply the scale. So that's the new default scale for the object. Let's save our project. So I'll click File and Save. And I'll just save it as Galaxy Tutorial and save Blender file. So I'm now going to go to the add menu and I'm going to add a camera, and I'll just go to front view. And then I'll just kind of zoom the camera in kind of about here, and I'll hit Control Alt Numpad 0 to bring the camera to my view. And also if I go to the object data properties of the camera with the camera selected, I'm going to change the focal length to 20. And that way it's going to have a bit more of a fisheye effect. So I can hit G to grab and then click with the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and I'll stick it there, and then I can just hit like G and Z and bring it down a little bit. And then if I select the cube object, I'm going to rotate the cube. But of course, once you'll actually be able to see the galaxy, we could rotate it and scale it and change it further. But I like using that kind of more fisheye effect, so I'm turning the focal length to 20 because it makes the galaxy look like it's massive. Now let's go to the world settings, and I'm going to for now just delete the world. Later we're going to be adding a custom world, but for now I'll just delete it so everything's black. Let's also go here to the render properties, and I'm going to scroll down and open up the color management, and on the view transform I'm going to use filmic, and then also on the look here I'm going to change this to high contrast so the colors are more contrasted and saturated. So let's now go over to the shader editor, and I'll go into the camera view, and I'm just going to select the cube, and we'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just call it Galaxy. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video, so if you don't have that enabled, you can click on Edit, you can go to the Preferences, and then here on the Add-ons tab, if you go to the search, you can search for node, and you can enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll be showing you how to use it in the video. So let's select the principal shader, and I'm just going to delete it, and let's now add a new shader, and I'm going to add an emission shader so that it's emitting light. Now, I'm not going to put the emission into the surface. If I go into the rendered viewport mode to see this, if I put the emission into the surface, the entire thing is going to be really bright, but I don't want that. I want to use volumes instead so that we can have the galaxy be a volume. So I'm going to put the emission into the volume instead. So now that I put it into the volume, you can see kind of here on the edges, it looks like it's kind of fading away. But I need a texture to control where the galaxy is going to be and where it's going to be transparent. So I'm going to search for a gradient texture, and we're going to put the gradient color into the emission color. So now that I've done that, you can kind of see there is a gradient where it's black here and then white over here, but I'm going to change the linear to spherical instead. And this is because I want to have a circle gradient. Now, when I do this, you can see it kind of just looks like a slice of pie or something. It's just a quarter of a circle. And so that's because I need to add vector data. So if I select the gradient texture, I'll hit Control T, and that's going to use the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And that's the feature of the Node Wrangler. So if you select a node or if you select a texture, you can hit Control T and it will add texture coordinate and mapping. And I'm going to use the object coordinates. So we'll put the object into the vector of the mapping. And this way, by using the object coordinates, it's going to put the gradient texture in the very center of the object. So now we just have this nice spherical gradient in the very center of our cube. And then let's go back over here to the emission, and I'm going to turn the strength up to 14 so it's a lot brighter. Now I want to keep my nodes nicely organized throughout the tutorial because the node setup is going to get pretty big and pretty complex. So I'm going to box select the texture coordinate and mapping and hit F to join it into a frame. And then I can add a label, and I'm just going to call this mapping. So this way we just have this nice frame just to organize the nodes. Now right now in the cycles rendering engine, if I kind of zoom around here and take a look at the gradient, you can see it's actually pretty fast. But once we add a bunch of like noise textures and we start to distort it, it's going to get kind of laggy. So just for right now, I'm going to change it over to Eevee so we can use the Eevee preview so it's a little bit faster in the viewport. But then I find the final render looks a little bit better in cycles. Let's go to the render properties, and I'm going to change this over to Eevee. Now if you want to use Eevee for the entire tutorial and the entire render, you can do that. The result actually does look pretty good in Eevee, so you can really do this tutorial in both render engines. Now one thing that I'm also going to do is get rid of the grid here by scrolling over, and then let's click right here on the overlays, and we're going to turn off the floor and turn off the X and Y axis. I just like that a bit better. Now if you take a look here at the side of the galaxy, you can see it's way too chunky and way too thick. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu and search for another mapping node. So I'll add another mapping and put it here before the gradient. And so we can use these scale values to change the size of the gradient and kind of squish it down. So if I just take this Z value and turn the Z value up, you can see now it looks more like an oval shape. So I'm going to turn the Z value on the scale to 4. And then the galaxy also isn't really big enough. I just want to make it larger to fit the size of the cube. So on the X and Y, I'm going to click, drag down, and then let go, and I'll type in 0.5. So you can see by changing this, it's going to change the size of the gradient. So I'll make it 0.5, so it's quite a bit bigger. And now if I go into the camera view, I can select the object, and I could maybe like bring it closer to the camera, or what I could actually do is just move the camera. So I'll move the camera in a little bit, just like that, so the camera's focusing there on the galaxy. Now, of course, the problem with this galaxy is it's way too smooth, so I want to add a bunch of noise here to kind of distort it and make it look interesting. So I'm going to drag this mapping back a bit, and then in between the gradient and the mapping, I want to distort it with a noise texture. So I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's drop this here. And I want to use the same mapping, or the original mapping, so it's not being stretched at all. So we're going to put the vector into the vector of this noise. Let's Control Shift select the noise texture. And so that's going to use the material output surface instead. So we'll change the noise settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 1, and I'm going to turn the detail to 12, and I'll turn the roughness up to 0.6 so it's a little bit more detailed. Now what I can do is take the factor and I can put that into the vector of the gradient texture, and let's just unplug the surface from the material output. So it's going to basically distort it. So now you can see because the noise textures are going into the vector, it's distorting the gradient texture so it doesn't even look like a gradient texture anymore. Well, what I want to do is mix between the mapping and the noise, so it's just distorted a little bit, but it still has the original shape. So what I'm going to do is search for the linear light. Let's add the linear light, and that's the mixed color node, and I'll put this here in between the noise and the gradient. Now this mapping here, the stretched mapping, this vector is going to go into color A, and then we're going to take the noise factor and we're going to put that into color B. So because this type here is set to linear light, if I drag the factor up and down, you can see if I turn it down to 0, it's just circular, but if I turn it up, it's going to start to distort it with the noise more and more. Now I'm going to turn the factor to a 0.3 because I mostly want to be the circular shape, but just have it be distorted a little bit. So now we have kind of this nice circular cloud. So now what I'm going to do is click and drag to box select these 4 nodes, so the mapping, noise, linear light, and gradient, and I'll hit F to join it into a frame, and I'm going to rename this to Galaxy Gradient and hit enter to keep things really nicely organized. Now before we continue, I want to show you how to make the volume in Eevee look more detailed, because once we add more and more detail to it, it's going to look not very detailed. So let's open up the side panel here, and we want to click on the render properties, and so this is using the Eevee rendering engine on the render properties, and we want to open up volumes here. So on this volumes, you can see there is a steps, so if I turn the steps really low, it looks really low quality, but if I turn the steps up more, it's going to be higher resolution. Now also there's this resolution value right here, so you can see we have like 1/16, and so if you do this, it looks very pixelated. If I turn it way up to like 1:1, it's going to be very detailed. Now I actually find that if the steps is set to 1:1, then Blender actually won't render it, I guess because it's too high quality. I'm going to set it to 1:2, and then here on the steps, I'm going to turn this to 100. So setting the resolution to 1:2 and the steps to 100, this is the highest resolution that I find that I can set it for Blender to actually render. I'm not sure if it's a bug or something, but for some reason, if I set it higher, Blender won't actually render. So I'm going to set this to 1:2 and the steps to 100, and now you can definitely see if you zoom in closely to the edges, it looks higher quality. Now it might be slightly more laggy in the viewport, so if you don't want to set the resolution this high, you don't have to, but that's what I'm going to do in the viewport. And then you can either render it like this so that it's higher resolution, or you can also set it back to cycles so it's even higher quality for the final render. So I'm just going to close the side panel. Now right here in the very center of the galaxy, it doesn't really look that detailed. It just looks like a big cloud. So I want to add more details into the center. So I'm going to select the emission and the material output, and I'm going to drag these back, and I'm going to create some more nodes right in here. So let's go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a noise texture to kind of distort the center and to give it more detail in the center. So then what I want to do is go all the way over here to this mapping. So this is the stretched mapping, the mapping that's been stretched. And let's put the vector into the vector of the noise. And then just to keep my nodes nicely organized, I'm going to shift, right click and drag over this wire to add a reroute. And I'll just drag the reroute up here. And that way the wires aren't overlapping. So what I want to do is mix the noise here into the original setup. So what I'm going to do is search for darken, and we're going to add the mix color darken and drop it right in here. So before the emission. And I'm going to put the noise texture color into color A. And then for color B here, I'm going to go all the way back to this gradient, and I'm going to put this gradient color here into color B. Now the wires are kind of overlapping, and I want to keep this nicely organized. So I'm going to shift right click and drag and shift right click and drag to add 2 reroutes. And I'll select both the reroutes and bring them down, and then I can scale them. And I can scale them on the y-axis by 0 just to flatten them, just like that. So this gradient goes down, over, and then back up here. Now this noise texture is really bright, and also if you look on the edges, you can see it has some colors, and I want to make it darker so it has more contrast. So I'm going to search for a ramp and add a color ramp and stick this in between the noise and the darken. So now what I'm going to do is start to drag these values together, and when I drag it together on the color ramp, it's going to make the noise much more contrasted. And so because it's more contrasted, now wherever it's black, it's going to be transparent so we can see the space behind it. So it looks like we have all these little clouds in our cube. Now I'm going to zoom in pretty close, and I'm going to drag the black tab to about here and then drag the white tab over to about there. Then I want to change some of the noise settings, so I'll leave the scale at 5, but I'll turn the detail to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.7. So it is quite a bit more detailed. Now with this factor value here, we can blend between using more of the noise or using more of the gradient, but I'm going to turn the factor all the way up to 1. And so because this type here is set to darken, it's going to darken the dark values around it. So we took this gradient and put it here into color B. And so basically it's going to mask out the shape of the galaxy. So now this noise texture here is only seen where the galaxy is. Then what I also want to do is search for a hue saturation value and put this in between the noise and the color ramp. So now that I put the hue saturation value between these two nodes, I have the value which I can drag up and down, so we can use that later in the custom node group to basically add a visibility value to the galaxy. So I'm going to box select these 4 nodes here, and I'll hit F, and I'm just going to call this galaxy texture and hit enter. And then I can maybe drag this down just to kind of compress the nodes a bit. Let's save our project. So the next thing that I want to do is to distort this texture kind of in a circular pattern so it kind of rotates around and looks like a classic galaxy. Because right now it kind of just looks like some circular clouds. So what I'm going to do is click and drag to box select all of these nodes here, and I'm just going to drag them over so we have some extra space in between the galaxy gradient and the galaxy texture. So let's go to the add menu and we're going to add another mapping node, and let's put it right here before the noise, so just stick it up here. So you can see there is a rotation, so there's a rotation X, Y, and Z. So if I rotate this around, that's going to rotate the galaxy. Well, what I can do is I can take this gradient texture color and I can put this into the rotation. So if I put it into the rotation, it's going to start to rotate and twist everything around. So you can kind of see now in the edges here, it kind of has that swirly pattern. However, I don't want it to rotate on the X, Y, and Z axis. I just want it to rotate on the Z axis. So we're going to unplug this. So what I'm going to do is search for combine, and we're going to add the combine X, Y, Z, and I'll put the vector into the rotation. So this way it's going to split up the X, Y, and Z axis. So I can now take the gradient texture. So we'll put this into the Z value. So now you can see it kind of has that swirling pattern, but it's not very strong. So I do want to make it stronger. So what I'm going to do is search for multiply, and we don't want to add the mix color multiply, we want to add the math multiply. And I'm going to stick this in between the gradient and the combine XYZ. So now if I turn up this value, it's basically going to make it stronger and stronger because it's multiplying the values. So if I turn this way up, you can see now it has this nice swirly pattern. Now, if I were just to change the multiply to add, it's just going to add value. So we'll just wait for this to load up. And if I turn this up more and more, you can see it's basically just adding value. So it's kind of just spinning it in a circle and it's not getting more and more strong. Well, if I turn this to a multiply, as it goes out towards the edge, it's going to be kind of warped more and more. So that's why I'm using multiply, because I want it to be more and more warped as it goes out. So in the center, it's not that warped, but then it becomes more and more that swirly pattern as it goes out. Now I'm going to turn this value to 14 because I think 14 looks pretty good. Now I also just want to have a little bit more customizable control. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu and search for power, and we're going to add the math power node. And I'm going to put this before the multiply. So we now have this exponent here. So you can see if I turn this up more and more, then the swirl is only going to be in the very center. So you can see kind of out here, it's not really distorted, but in the center it really is. Well, if I turn this down instead and make it a small value, like make it a negative 0.1 or something like that, you can see now in the center isn't very distorted, but on the outside it is very distorted. So 1 is the default, but I think turning it to 2 looks pretty good. So if I just turn it up to 2, you can see it's very swirly in the center, but then kind of on the edges, it's not that strong and it's not affecting it that much. So I'm going to click and drag to box select these 4 nodes, and I'll hit F, and I'm going to type in galaxy rotation and hit enter. Now within this texture, I want even more detail. So I just want to add even more detail to the galaxy to make it look large and detailed. So in between the galaxy rotation and the galaxy texture, I want to add another group of textures right here, which is going to make it more detailed. So I'm just going to box select these nodes and drag them back here. So what I'm going to do is search for another noise texture, and we'll place it here. And then what I want to do is search for another mix color linear light. And we're going to stick this in between the mapping and the noise here. So we're going to mix the noise into the linear light to add even more detail. Now, I don't want this noise texture to be distorted by any of these other values, but I do want it to use the object coordinates. So what I'm going to do is go way back here to the very first mapping, and I'm going to click, drag over, and then let go, and then we can add a reroute, drop it there, and then I can click and drag way over here, and then let go, and then add another reroute. Then I can click here and drop it into the vector. I'm just doing that so that it keeps the nodes nicely organized. So we're just going to use the original mapping for this noise. So now I'm going to take this noise texture color and we're going to put it into color B. And then we're going to take this mapping and we're going to put that into color A. So now you can see, because we're mixing it together, it looks very noisy. And you can drag the factor, you can drag it up and down to control the strength of it. I'm going to turn the factor to just a 0.1 so it's not quite as strong, but it's definitely going to add more detail. You can see here it is before, and then here it is after, and you can turn up more and more if you want to be even more detailed. But I do also want to change the noise texture to add even more detail. So I'll turn the scale to 2 because I like it being a bit smaller, but then I'm going to turn the detail to 12 and the roughness to 0.6 to add even more detail. But of course, this will also be a custom value in the node group. So let's box select these 2 nodes and we'll hit F, and I'm just going to rename this to Galaxy Details. Alright, so the galaxy is starting to look really cool. It has lots of details. You can kind of move through here to kind of see the galaxy. So it looks really cool, but it's all just white. So I want to add colors to it. So let's go to the very end, and I'm going to drag the emission and material output back so we have more space here. And we're going to create the galaxy colors. So to do that, I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put this here after the darken. Now we want to leave one of the values at black. because if we turn this up to white, you can see that's going to get rid of the transparency. So I want all around here to be basically invisible, and then just where it's white, that's going to be where the galaxy is. So we're going to keep this as black. So now what I want to do is add all the custom colors here. So I'm going to click and drag over, and we're just going to place a color tab there. And this one is going to be like a blue color. So if I make it blue, for now, I'll just make like a quick blue color like that. I will show you all of my hex codes if you want to use the exact colors, but I also just recommend playing around with the colors so you can kind of get a good idea for kind of using the color wheel and just kind of getting an eye for the colors that you like. So then I'm going to hold in the control key and click 3 more times, and we're going to add more colors here. And again, after all of this, then I will show you the exact hex codes. But let's go to this next one here. So this one's going to be kind of like a dark red. Then let's go to the next one here. And this one's also going to be red, but maybe a little bit brighter. So that's looking really cool. We now have like the swirly texture of red and blue. Let's go to the next one. Then for the next color here, I'm just going to have this also be a red color and be a similar color as this one. Then I'm going to hold down the control key and click a little farther apart here. And then this one, I'm going to make kind of a bright reddish orangey. So just slightly getting orange. Then I'm going to hold down the control key and click here. Let's maybe drag these all out so they have a little bit more space in between them. Let's go to this one here. And this one is going to be kind of like a little bit of a darker red, maybe a little bit less saturated. And then I'll hold down the control key and click here to add one more. And this is going to be the last one. This one will be in the very center. And this one is definitely going to be more of like a yellowy orange. However, I have very specific colors which I like to use when I was prepping for the tutorial, so I just added those colors in right there. And if you want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, then right up here on the screen, I'm going to show you all the different colors, starting out at the top being black, and then the blue one, the purple ones, then like the red ones, and then the orange, kind of the brownish, and then the yellow. So if you want to copy and paste those hex codes to use the exact same colors, you'll just click on the tab, click here on the yellow color, and then here in the hex code, you're just going to paste the name for the hex code. So now our galaxy is looking much more interesting. Then what I'm also going to do is search for a hue saturation value, and I'm going to drop this after the color ramp. So this way we'll have a value to make it lighter and darker, a saturation to make it black and white or colorful, and then a hue just to change all the colors at once, so we can use that later in the custom node group. So I'll box select these nodes, hit F, and we're going to add a label, and I'm going to call this Galaxy Color. So now what I want to do is add a little galaxy center part, and I want it to be very, very white, and it's going to be brighter and stronger, so it'll be glowing when we do the compositing. So to make the galaxy center, I'm going to search for another gradient texture, and we'll drop it down here. Let's drag the nodes over so we have more space. And I'm going to turn the gradient texture from linear to spherical, so it's a circular gradient. Now what I could do is I could use the vector, and I could go all the way over here, and I could use the vector for this mapping. However, if I did that, if I used the original mapping, the sphere would be very smooth. So if I just take like this here and drag it into the gradient texture, then take the gradient texture color and put it into the emission color so we can preview it, you can see the very center of the galaxy would be very smooth and round. And I don't want that just because it doesn't look as realistic. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the galaxy details. So if I go right back here to the galaxy details, I'm going to be using this linear light color. So I'm going to drag the result down, then let go and add a reroute. It's right there on the search. Then I'm going to click and drag over here and then let go and add another reroute, and then I'll drag this up and stick it into the vector. So this way you can see by using the linear light instead of using the original mapping, on the edges here it looks kind of random and distorted and noisy, so it'll add details to that white spot in the very center. Now what I want to do is search for a hue saturation value and drop this after the gradient, and then also I want to search for a color ramp and put this after the hue saturation value. And why I'm adding these two nodes is because the value can be used to make it brighter and darker, so we'll use that later in the custom node group to change the size of the gradient. But also I can drag the white and black values around to change the first size, so like the default size. So I'm going to drag the black tab to about here, and then I'll drag the white tab to about there. So now we have just a little circular gradient, and then this value we'll be able to use this to control the size of the white circle in the middle. So now what I want to do is mix it into the original galaxy. So we're going to search for the mix color node. Let's drop it here before the emission. And this color ramp here, this is going to go into the factor because it's going to be a mask because it's just white and black. So now what we want to do is we want to take the galaxy colors, the hue saturation value, and we're going to put this into color A. So now you can see because we're mixing the galaxy colors in with this mix here, you can see we're basically just adding it on top. So it's just on top of the galaxy. Then what I want to do is go here to color B, and if I go to the value here, I'm going to type in 0.8. I think 0.8 is a pretty good brightness. You can make it more bright or less bright, but I find if you make it too bright, when we add the glare in the compositor, it's just going to be too strong. Now I actually realized that on the color ramp, I kind of made it a bit too big. So actually what I want to do is drag the white tab over here and then drag the black tab over, because the galaxy was just a little bit too strong. The little part in the center was too strong. So I'll just kind of drag it over like that. Now you can see it does look pretty subtle, but it still is definitely there. And it's going to be kind of bright. So it'll add like a bit of a glow to the galaxy. So we're going to box select these 4 nodes and I'll hit F, and I'm going to call this Galaxy Center. So now what I want to do to add even more detail is to add some little tiny stars in the galaxy. So maybe they're like planets or like solar systems, because galaxies are actually really large and have lots of solar systems inside. So there's going to be a bunch of little like stars or solar systems just to add more detail. So after the galaxy center, I'm going to create another node group, which is going to be stars. So I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture, drop this here. And if we put the Voronoi distance into the emission, we can preview it. Now it's a little bit hard to see right now because it's like super white. So I want to make it darker. First though, I want to plug something into the vector. So if I go all the way back here to this mapping, we have this original mapping, and I don't want the stars to be distorted by anything. So we're going to use this original mapping. So this vector goes down, goes over here. So let's click and drag way over, and then let go. And we can add a reroute, and then we can drag the reroute into the vector. So now it's using the object coordinates for the Voronoi. Then what I want to do is search for ramp. So we're going to add a color ramp and drop it here, and we can drag the black tab over and drag the white tab over. And you can see now we can actually see what the Voronoi texture is looking like. Now it doesn't really look like stars right now. That's because we need to switch the values. So if I switch it and drag this over here and then drag the black tab over here, you can see now it just looks like little stars. But if I drag this kind of back so I can see this what it looks like before, so just drag this way over here, you can see they don't actually look like circles, they look like little like half circles or chunks. And so to change that, I'm going to click on the F1 and I'm going to change this to smooth F1 instead. So now if I flip the values and drag the white over there and the black over there, you can see we now have these nice smooth little stars, and I'll drag this really small so they're very tiny. And I actually like that some of them are bigger and some of them are smaller, because maybe these are like single stars and then these ones are like maybe solar systems. Some of them are bigger and some of them are smaller. However, they're all way too big right now. So I'm going to turn the scale on the Voronoi to 75. So just to 75. So now if you just kind of go through here, it's a little bit hard to see because it's kind of dark. But if you look through here, it looks like there's a bunch of little stars there in our object. I'm also going to search for a hue saturation value and drop this between the Voronoi and the color ramp. And this way we'll have a value, so I can drag the value up and down, and that's going to change the size of the stars. You can see if I turn this way down, now the stars are a lot bigger. Now if I zoom in really close to the color ramp, I'm going to drag this even smaller, so it's quite small, so just like that. So the stars are very small. Now the problem with this is that the stars are covering the entire cube. It's a little bit hard to see right now, but if I just drag this back, you can see the stars are covering the entire cube, and I only want them to be in the center of where the galaxy actually is. So we basically need to mask out the stars. So to do this, I'm going to search for a ramp, and we'll add a color ramp. Now if I go way back here to the very starting, you can see there is this galaxy gradient and there's this gradient texture. So that's basically where the galaxy is going to be. So you can see the color goes down here, then it goes all the way over here. So what I can do is click on this tab here, or the reroute, and I'll drag all the way over and stick it into the new color ramp which we added. So if I take this color ramp color and put it into the emission so we can preview it, you can see it's just black all around and then white in the very center. So now what I'm going to do to mix it together is I'm just going to add another mix color. So add the mix color, and we're going to drop it right here. Now the top color ramp, that's going to go into color A, so that's the stars, but then this color ramp here, which is just the circle for where the galaxy is, that's going to go into the factor to control where it's going to be. Then here on color B, we're going to make this fully black. Now if you kind of take a look at this, take a look at the edges here, you can kind of still see the stars over on this side. So you can see the stars on the edges, and that's because we just need to flip the color ramp. So if I just flip the color ramp colors, so the black is over here and the white is over here, that's basically going to invert it. So now the stars are only going to be in the center. Now it's hard to see right now, but if you take this color ramp and drag it up, you can see now the stars are just going to be in the very center. So they're just going to be where the galaxy is. And then make sure this color B here is fully black so that the edges are transparent. So let's box select all these nodes, and we're going to hit F. and we're going to call this galaxy stars. So we're getting towards the end of the setup. We now have the galaxy stars and the galaxy, but I want to mix them together. So to do this, we're going to search for a light tin and add a mixed color light tin. And we're going to take the galaxy center, which is the original setup, and we're going to put this into color A. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put this mix here, which is the galaxy stars, and we're going to put that into the factor to determine what part is going to be A and what part is going to be B. Now this is set to light tin, and because the stars are light, it's just going to add the light values. So it's going to add the stars into the galaxy. So we'll put the light tin result into the color. And now that it's loaded up, you can clearly see the galaxy, but it's really hard to see the stars, and that's because the stars are not very bright. Now if I type color B and turn this up, that's going to make the stars brighter. But they're still not bright enough. So I'm going to click on color B, and I'm going to click on the value here, and I'm going to type in 4 and hit enter. So by turning it to 4, we're making the white value brighter than 4, so it's going to be very bright. So now if I take a look at the galaxy, I can clearly see the stars, and I can move through them, and so now we have lots of little stars or solar systems there in the galaxy. So that's just going to add so much more detail to the galaxy, but also the stars kind of end once they get to the very end of the galaxy. So I can just go into the camera view to take a look at this, and that is looking pretty cool, but it definitely could look better. So to make it look better, we're going to add stars in the background, and I'm also going to switch this to cycles because cycles looks better. And then to really make it look awesome, we're going to add some compositing nodes to kind of make it glowing and just make it look a lot more interesting. If I change the render engine over to cycles, I think it already looks a lot better in cycles. You can see it's so much more detailed. It is a little bit laggy, but it looks way more detailed in cycles. But that is it for the procedural material, so we will be joining it together into a custom node group later, but I'm going to do that at the very end for the people who just want to do that. But for now, I'm going to go do the world node. So let's save the project, and I'm going to click on object, and we're going to change this to world, and then I can select the galaxy and press H to hide it, and I'll go into the rendered viewport mode, and this is in the cycles render engine. So let's click on new to create a new world, and I can just call this like space background. And for now, I'll make the background fully black, so it's black space. So what I'm going to do is start by searching for a noise texture. Let's drop the noise here and hit Control T to add the texture coordinate mapping. And we're going to use the object coordinates. Let's box select the texture coordinate mapping and hit F. And I'm just going to call this mapping and hit enter. So now we can take the noise factor and put that into the color here just to preview it. Or you can just Control Shift select it if you want to preview it. So I'm going to use this noise texture to create kind of that nebula look. So there's little bits which are kind of a very dark blue, and then the rest of it will be like black. So let's change the noise settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 3.5. I'll turn the detail to 15 so it's very detailed, and the roughness to a 0.6. So now what I want to do is kind of make it darker and lighter so there's only little bits of the noise, and that's going to be the nebula. So to do this, I'm going to search for the map range node, and the map range kind of acts similarly to a color ramp, so you can basically make the values more contrasted. But the map range actually has more custom controls than the color ramp. But I usually like to use color ramps because they're a little bit easier to see visually, but sometimes the map range is just way more useful. So if I turn up this from min value, that's going to start to clamp the bottom values and get rid of those values and make it really black. So it's making the blackest value more black. So I'm going to turn this to a 0.5. So you can now see that we just have this little clouds texture, and so there's just some white spots here and there, and that's going to be where the nebula is. Now if I go to the 2 max, I want to make it darker, so if I turn it down, you can see it's going to make those gray values darker, so they're going to be less visible. So I'm going to turn the 2 max to a 0.1. So if you just take a look closely, you can see there's just some subtle cloudy textures. So I'm going to box select these nodes, hit F, and I'm going to call this nebula mask. So now what I want to do is I want to create like the basic space background, and then we'll mix the nebula mask into it. So I'm going to search for another noise texture, and I'm going to plug the mapping into the vector, and let's Control Shift select the noise texture to preview it. And I'll change the settings, so I'll turn the scale to 15, I'll turn the detail to 15 so it's very detailed, and the roughness all the way up to 1. So now it's a very noisy, detailed texture. Now what I'm going to do is to create some custom colors is add a color ramp after this noise texture. And for this first black value here, I'm going to make that fully black. Then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click in the center. And for this color in the very center, I'm going to make it very, very dark and then turn it towards the blue. And the hex code is 0B0019FF. So it's going to be a very, very dark blue. And then for the last color here on this side of the color ramp, this is also going to be a very, very dark blue. So I'm going to make it really dark and turn it towards the blue. So the hex code for this is 000230FF. So we basically have black, kind of a dark bluish purple, and then a dark blue. So let's box select these nodes, hit F, and I can call this space background. So now what I want to do is mix these two together. So if I select the color ramp and shift select the map range, I'll press Control 0. So Control 0 is going to add this mix color here. So we'll drag it over and open it up. Now in the mix type here, I want to set it to lighten. So it's just going to add the light value. So change it to lighten. Then what I want to do is put the map range result here into the factor, because this map range, that's just going to be kind of that nebula cloud texture. So we're putting that into the factor. So then the space background will go into color A. So now color B, that can be the actual color for the nebula. So I'm going to make it this really strong saturated blue. So just make it blue a bit darker. The hex code is 0002B2FF. So now we can just Control Shift select the background to preview what it's looking like. Now I still want to add stars. It's looking pretty cool, but it needs more detail. So I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. We'll drop it here, and I'll put the mapping into the vector, and let's preview the Voronoi. And then what I also want to do is search for ramp and add a color ramp and put this here after the Voronoi. So now what I can do is drag these two tabs together, and that'll make it more contrasted. But I'm going to flip the values, so I'm going to put the white over here and then drag the black way over. And if I zoom in really close, I'm just going to make the stars very small and very contrasted. Now if I go to the Voronoi texture, I'm going to turn the scale to 600, so there are lots of stars, and they're very hard to see. You really can't see them that well, but they are there. So now what I want to do is I want to mix the stars and the space together. So I'll drag this back, and then I'll go to the Add menu and search for a Mix Color Lighten and drop this right up here. And we're going to put the top lighten into color A, and then this color ramp, the bottom color ramp down here, this is going to go into the factor. So now what I can do is select the Voronoi color ramp and hit F, and I can just call this stars and hit enter. So now back here on the lighten, let's actually Control Shift select the background to preview it. And if I take color B and make it fully white, that's going to be the star color. The problem is that the stars are really hard to see because they're so small. So I'm going to make them brighter. So if I go to the Add menu, I'm going to search for Add, and I'm going to add the Math Add and drop this here, and I'll put the value into color B. So now I can take this value and turn it to 0, but then I can just take this value, the top value, and turn it more and more. And as I turn it more and more, it's going to make the value brighter than 1. So now as I look around here, the stars are very, very tiny, but they're also very bright. So I'm going to turn the value to like 500 so that you can see a lot more of the stars and they're really bright. So I'm just going to hit Control Spacebar to go into full screen, and check that out. We have a really cool deep space background with little bits of blue for the nebula. So I can box select these nodes and hit F, and I'm going to call this Mix Stars and Space. And you can also turn up the strength here, but I'm just going to leave that strength at 1. If you turn it up, it just is a bit too blue and it doesn't look like space exactly, so I'm just going to keep it at 1. So I can now hit 0 to go into the camera view, hit Alt-H to unhide the galaxy, and there we go. We now have the space in the background with our galaxy. Let's click on World and go back to the Object nodes. So now to make this look very interesting, we're going to do some compositing. But first we need to actually render the image so we can do the compositing. So I'll jump back here to the layout. Let's go over the settings. So the render engine, I'm going to use Cycles. You could use Eevee. And again, if you are using Eevee, I'd recommend going down here to the volumes in the Eevee settings. And I found that turning this to 1 to 2 and then turning the steps to 100 is the highest I can get it to actually render. For some reason, it just won't render. It might be a bug. It might be that it's crashing or something, but this is the highest resolution that I can change the volumes to. But if you're using Cycles, you don't even need to use that value. It'll be very high quality. Now, if you open up the sampling here, I find that just rendering it with like 50 samples is just fine. So I'm going to use 50 samples, and I'm also going to turn on the denoise here so it denoises the image and makes it look nicer. So just save the project, hit Control S to save, and then I'll click on Render and render the image. Alright, so the render is finished and it does look pretty cool, but it's going to look way more cool once we do the compositing. So let's click over here to go to the compositing workspace, and then I've set up my 3D viewport so I can see the compositor in the viewport, but I'm just going to click in the corner, drag over, and let go just to close that. So let's now click on New to add new compositing nodes. And you can see for some reason Blender seems to be occasionally clipping some of the nodes. This happened in the shader editor. Hopefully this isn't happening for you. Probably it's just a bug in Blender version 5.0, but if you're kind of seeing the nodes disappearing, that's why. So I'm going to search for a glare node. Let's drop the glare node here after the render layers. And I'm going to set it to the streaks type first, because I want to make the stars look like they have kind of these little streaks, kind of to look like they're twinkling. So I'm going to turn the quality here to high. Then I'm going to go down here to the streaks value, and I'm going to turn this up to 6 so that you can see kind of some of these ones here, like this one over here, just right there. So you can kind of see if I zoom in really close, you can see there's what the glare is doing. So you can see there's what the glare is doing on some of those brighter stars. It's just adding kind of that little twinkle or streaks. Now what I want to do is search for another glare node, but I'm going to add the bloom type. So add a glare bloom, and we're going to drop it here. You can change the type to bloom. And I'm going to turn the size to 0.2 because I think it's a bit too strong, so I'll turn it to 0.2. So you can see now the center is glowing a lot. And I'll turn the quality type to high. Now what I want to do is drag and drop the chromatic aberration, so I'll drop it in here. This is a new feature in Blender version 5, and I'll just drop it here after the glare. Now in the type here, I'm going to change this to lens dispersion because I like that better. And then for the factor, I want it to just turn it to a small value of 0.02, so just a 0.02 because I don't want it to be too strong, because if I make it too strong it just looks a bit weird. So just a very small value. So now you can see here on the corners we kind of get that colorful effect there where the stars are being kind of stretched. Then what I'm also going to do is add the tune image. So let's grab the 2 image and we're going to drop it here. Again, another new feature in Blender version 5. So we'll grab the tune image and we'll put it here after the chromatic aberration. And I definitely don't want to overuse this because if I like turn up the clarity and the sharpen way too much, it just looks way too strong and bright. But I'm going to turn the clarity up just to a 0.1 and then the detail up to a 0.1. So definitely don't overdo it, but just turn it up a little bit. Just a 0.1. You could turn up the sharpen if you want to, but I don't really want to. So I'm just going to turn the clarity and detail to a 0.1, and it makes the stars just look a bit sharper and makes everything look nicer. Now the last node that I want to add to really make this look like a really cool space scene is to add a little bit more blue, because there just isn't that much blue. So I'm going to search for an RGB curves, and we're going to drag the RGB curves here after the tune image. And I find adding this last value really makes it pop and really makes it look more like space. So I'm going to click on the B for blue, and then I can click and drag it up into this corner. And you can see just adding that little bit of blue really pops out the image. It really kind of color corrects the scene and makes everything look nicer. So that's it for the compositing. So you can see here it is before and here it is after. So it really does improve the look of the render. So you can save this image by pressing F11, then clicking on render result and clicking on viewer node, and then you can click on image and you can save the image. And I'll just save it as tutorial render in my project files as a PNG, or you could use JPEG, and I'll just save the final image. Now there are just a couple other settings that I want to show you if the glare is too big or too small, and also if the stars are too visible or less visible. So what I'm going to do is go back to the shading here, and then I'm going to click on the object here and go to the world nodes. And then also to preview the compositing in the viewport, you can scroll over here and click on the drop down and change the compositor from disabled to always. So I'm just going to zoom into the stars. So if you find that the stars are a little too less visible and you can't see very many of them, or if the stars are way too bright and way too strong, you can of course adjust the glare in the compositor. But I find if you go here to the world nodes and go here to the stars color ramp, just slightly changing this black value, so making it slightly over this way or slightly over this way, is going to massively change how the stars look. So if the black is slightly over here, the stars are going to be way brighter, or if it's just slightly farther over, the stars are going to be darker and you won't be able to see as many of them. So you can adjust that if you don't quite like how the stars look. Now the other value is if I click on the world and change this back to object, and let's zoom out here. So let's say that the very center of the galaxy is way too bright or not bright enough. You could of course change it in the compositing nodes, but I find that it's a little bit hard because then the stars are kind of a separate brightness value than the galaxy, so it can be kind of hard to adjust the values and get them to look correct in the compositor. So if you go to the galaxy texture and you zoom in here, what you can do is slightly drag this black value back, and you can see everything's going to be way brighter, or slightly drag the white tab over and everything's going to be a lot darker. So if you don't like how the brightness is and the glare is, you can slightly change that color ramp on the galaxy texture. So now what I'm going to do for everyone who wants to follow along is we're going to be joining this together into a custom node group to add customizable values so you can customize the look of the galaxy. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes here except the material output, so everything else, and I'll hit Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. Let's hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and I'm going to drag the node group way over here to the material output, and then I can drag it out to make it bigger, and I can copy the material name and paste it here into the node group so it's called Galaxy. Now this emission here, I don't want people to think that they need to plug this into the surface because it's going into the volume. So I'm going to rename this. So I'll hit tab to go into the node group, I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel, and I'll click on the group tab, and you can see here on the group sockets it's called emission. I'm going to double click on this and call it emission volume. So now outside the node group, you can see it's called emission volume. Because if we plug it into the surface, it's not going to look good because we don't want to see the surface. We want to use the volume so it's actually 3D and inside the mesh. Let's hit tab to go back into the node group, and let's go all the way over here to this side, and we now have this group input, and so we can plug up all the custom values to the group input to control them outside of the node group. So I'm going to drag the group input inside the mapping. So just stick it right here. And I want to put the scale into the group input. And so this way the scale is going to control the entire size of the entire galaxy because this mapping is plugged up to all the textures. Now to make it a little bit faster in the viewport, I'm going to switch back to Eevee. So let's click here and we're going to turn off the compositor. So just disable that. Then let's open up the side panel and we'll change this back to the Eevee engine. So it's a bit faster in Eevee. Now this scale value, you can see it's 3 values, but I just want it to be 1 value. So we're going to click on the type here and we're going to change it to float. So it is 1 value. Then we're going to hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and we need to turn the scale back to 1. And now we can hit the tab key to go back into the node group. And also this default value here, we want to turn that to 1. So that's the default value. So outside the node group, you can see I can drag the scale up and down, and that will change the size of the entire galaxy. So let's go back into the node group. So what I'm going to do is click on the group input and hit Shift D to duplicate it. Then we're going to hit F to bring it out of the frame. And then if I click on this other group input, let's press Control H, and Control H is going to minimize it so we can just see the values that it's using. Now we'll take this group input and we're going to stick it here inside the galaxy gradient. And I want to control the distortion strength. So if I go here to this linear light, we have this factor which is distorting it. So I'll put the factor into the extra socket, and let's double click on this to rename it. And I'm going to call this distortion strength. Then I want to add all of the values of this noise. So I'll put the scale, the detail, the roughness, the lacunarity, and the distortion all into these extra values. And I'm just going to add the word distortion at the starting of them. So if I double click on the distortion, hit Control C to copy the name, I'll click on the scale and just hit Control V to paste it. So we have distortion scale, distortion detail, distortion roughness, distortion lacunarity, and the distortion. Now what I'm going to do is click and drag down here on these dots to make this a lot bigger, and we'll close this up here. And I'm going to click on the plus, and I'm going to add a new panel just to organize this really well. And I'll click on the panel, double click on it, and call it distortion. Then what I'm going to do is drag the distortion into the panel, the lacunarity, the roughness, the detail, the scale, and the strength, and drag those all into that panel so it's nicely organized. I'm also going to hold down the Control key and then click with my middle mouse wheel, and that's going to resize it, so I'll make it smaller so we have a lot more space here because we're going to add a lot of values. So let's hit Shift D to duplicate, drag this up here, hit F to bring it out of the frame and drop it outside the frame. Then if we click on this group input, we can press Control H to minimize it. So let's now stick this new one here into the galaxy rotation, and we can select all of these and drag them over, drag this back so we have more space there. And I want to add the galaxy spin warp. So if I drag this exponent here on the power, that's going to kind of spin it and warp it. So I'm going to take the exponent and put that into the extra socket, double click on this, and I'll call this galaxy spin warp. Then I want to take the multiply value. You can see if I turn this up and down, that's adding the size of the ring, so it's making the rings bigger or smaller. So I'll put the value into the extra socket, double click on this to rename it, and I'll call it galaxy rings size. So let's hit Shift D to duplicate, hit F to bring it out of the frame. We'll click on the group input and hit Control H just to make it smaller so it looks nice. And let's drag this over into the next one. So the galaxy details, we'll drop it in here and drag it over, drag everything over. And I want to take this linear light here. You can see that's kind of adding more details or less details. So I'll put this into the extra socket. And I'm going to double click on this and call it detail strength. And then I'm going to take all the other values on the noise. So the scale, the detail, the roughness, the lacunarity, and the distortion. So put that in the extra socket. Let's hit Control H to make this smaller. And then if I just double click on detail, I'll copy that name and just paste it here. So we have detail scale, detail detail, detail roughness, detail lacunarity, and detail distortion. So now I'm going to click on the plus here. We're going to add a new panel. This panel I'm going to rename to detail, and then we'll put the distortion, lacunarity, roughness, detail, scale, and strength into that detail panel. And I'm going to drag the detail and drop it right down here in this extra area. So drop it there so it's underneath the distortion. So we'll hit Shift D to duplicate, hit F to bring it out of the frame, hit Control H to make it bigger. And what I want to do is give myself some more space. So I need to click and drag to box select all of these nodes right here, drag them over a little bit. Let's zoom in closely again. And we're going to take this one, stick it into the galaxy texture, and stick it right there. Now this value here is controlling the visibility. So you can make the galaxy less visible or more visible. So we'll put this into the extra socket. We'll double click on this, and I'll call it galaxy visibility. Then I want to add all the same values here from the noise texture. So the scale, the detail, the roughness, the lacunarity, and the distortion. And I'm going to double click on this to rename them and add the word galaxy at the starting. So we have galaxy scale, galaxy detail, galaxy roughness, galaxy lacunarity, and galaxy distortion. We'll click on the group input, hit Shift D to duplicate, hit F to bring it out of the frame, click on the group input and hit Control H just to make it smaller. Now, before I continue, I want to add all of these galaxy values into a new panel. So we'll click on the plus here, add a new panel. This one I'm going to rename to galaxy, and then we'll put the distortion, lacunarity, roughness, detail, scale, visibility, ring size, and spin warp into the galaxy. As well as the scale, I'm going to double click on this and rename it to galaxy scale and put that into the galaxy panel as well. So now what I want to do is add the colors. So I'm going to drag this over here. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using that add-on, the color ramp converter. And I talked about this at the beginning of the tutorial. So it's completely free and you can download it with the link in the description. So once you've downloaded the zip file of the add-on, you just want to drag it and drop it from your file browser into Blender and then click on OK to install it. And then if you click on Edit Preferences, go to the User Preferences, go to Add-ons. If you search for like Convert or Node, you can see here is the color ramp converter. You can also click on Save Preferences so it's always in your future projects. So let's close the preferences. So now what I want to do is click on the Converter tab right here, and you can see we can select the color ramp and then click on Convert Color Ramp. So now you can see I added this new node group here within our node group. So it's a node group within a node group, but it has all these different custom values for the color ramp. Now, if I click on this to select it, you can actually go inside it. If you hit the tab key, I'm just going to go outside of it. And what we want to do is add these as custom values. So we can click on Add Group Input Node. So if we click on that, you can see it added a new group input node and it added all the color values. Now, if I go back here to the group tab, you can see we also have the positions, but I personally don't really want to change the positions because they're so close to each other. So it's going to be a little bit hard and finicky to control, and I just don't need them. So I'm going to click on each position value and then hit the minus to get rid of it. So this one, hit the minus, this one, hit the minus, this one, hit the minus, and just continue to do that all the way down. So we're just going to have the color values instead. And there's the last one. So we now have colors 1, or we have colors 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 7. And let's click on this group input and hit Control H just to make it smaller, and I'll drag it down here. Now, if you wanted to, you could delete this color ramp, but I actually want to keep it just in case I want to come back to it. Now, I'm going to box select everything. So box select all these over on this side and drag them over just so I have a bit more space because it was getting kind of squashed here. Now, what I also want to do is use this one here, the extra group input that we have, and I want to plug the hue, the saturation, and the value all into the extra sockets. And now if I double click on this to rename it, I'm going to call it color hue. This one I'm going to call color saturation. And this one I'm going to call color value. So now what I want to do is put all of these in a new panel. So I'll click on the plus, add a panel, double click on the panel, and I'm going to call it colors. And then I'll put the value, saturation, hue, and also 7 and 6 and 5 and 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 all into the colors. And I can select this giant one here, hit Control H, and we can drag it down here and just stick it like right up there so it's nicely organized. Now on color 0, this is actually the transparency. So if I go outside the node group and turn up color 0, you can see it's going to ruin the look of the galaxy because it has to be black so it's transparent. So if I go back into the node group and click on color 0, you could delete it if you don't want it. I'm just going to double click on it and call it transparency color. So that way, if I go outside the node group, you can see it says transparency color. So really you just want to leave this to black so that it's always transparent on the edges. Let's go back into the node group. Now, if I hold down the control key and click and drag with my middle mouse wheel to make this really small, let's drag this way down here. So drag it all the way down so we have even more space here. And I want to click on the galaxy and drag it all the way up here. So click and drag the galaxy and drop it here. So we first have the galaxy panel, then the colors, then the distortion, and then the detail. So now what I want to do is add custom values for the center to control that little center bit. So I'm going to duplicate the group input, hit F to bring it out of the frame. We want to select all these and drag it over so we have more space. And I'll drag the group input right here and drag it back in the galaxy center. And I'm going to hit Control H to make this bigger, and let's drag this all the way up. So I want to control the center color. So you can see this color right here on this mix. That is going to be the center color. So let's take color B, and we're going to put this into the extra socket, and then let's double click on it to rename it, and I'll call it center color. Then I want to take this value, which is the hue saturation value here, and you can see that's going to make it lighter and darker, so it'll control the size of it. So I'll put the value into the extra socket, and I'm going to call this center size. And I'll hit Control H to make this smaller, and let's just drag it all the way down here. Maybe just drag it right here, so it's just a little bit more nicely organized. So I'm going to put it above the gradient texture. Let's hit Shift D to duplicate, hit F, and then we'll hit Control H to make it bigger, and we're going to add some more values. So we're going to add the star values. First though, I want to put these into their own collection for the center. So I'm going to click on the plus, add a panel. We don't want to put them into a new collection, we want to put them into a new panel. So I'll add a panel, and this one I'm going to call center. And I'm going to put the center size and the center color into the center, and then let's drag all the way down. We're going to stick it right down here at the very bottom, so it's at the very bottom of this setup. But then I think the distortion and detail could be below it, so let's put the distortion, drag it down there, and then the detail, drag it down there. I like that a little bit better. So we have galaxy, colors, center, distortion, detail, and then at the very bottom of all this, we're going to add one more, which will be the stars. So let's make the stars right now. So for the stars scale, I'm going to use the Voronoi texture scale. So we'll put this into the extra socket, double click on this to rename it, and I can call it stars scale. Then I want to control the size of each individual star. So if I turn this value, you can see the value is going to make the stars a lot bigger for each individual star. So I'll put the value into the extra socket, and I'm going to call this value individual star size. And then finally, the last value that I want to add, if I drag this over here, I want to put the light tin color B into the extra socket to control the color of the stars, because this is going to control the star color. So I'll put B into the extra socket. Let's double click on it, and I'm going to call it stars color. Let's click on the plus. We're going to add a new panel. This panel we're going to rename to stars, and then we'll put the stars color, the stars individual size, and the stars scale into that one there. And then if I hold down the control key and make this really small and drag this down, it's very big. We're running out of space. I wish there was a better way to control this, because like I can't click on the stars and drag it down here. You can see it'll just stop. So I need to see the entire thing. So I'm going to control middle click, make this really small, and then I can take the stars panel and drag it all the way to the extra area here and let go. So we have the stars at the very bottom. And then I can select this group input and hit Control H to make it smaller. Now let's drag it right down here at the very end of the setup, and then select everything, move it over so we have a bit more space. All right, so we are finally done. So we'll hit the N key to close the side panel, and we'll hit the Tab key to go outside the node group. And you can see here's the giant node group with all the custom values. And I'm going to click and drag just to make them smaller to close the panels so they're a lot smaller. So now you can just open up each one at a time and just change the colors or whatever values you want to control. So I already went over the custom values at the beginning of the tutorial, so I'm not going to go through all of them again. If you want to see all the custom values and what they do, you can watch the beginning of the video. But I'm going to open up the side panel and we'll change the render engine back to cycles so we can see the final thing. And then also click here on the shading dropdown and we'll turn the compositor on. So there we go. I'll just hit Control S to save, and that'll finish it up for this tutorial on how to create this procedural galaxy in Blender. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the tutorial project files, you can get that with the links in the video description, on my Gumroad store, and my Patreon page, and also the Superhive Market. And to purchase more of my procedural materials, you can check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. Now I also have a few other space-themed tutorials if you're interested in checking those out. So I have a tutorial where I create a futuristic stylized ring planet. I also have a tutorial series on how to create a sci-fi lunar lander, so that's a pretty cool tutorial series. I also have a tutorial on creating a procedural ice planet, also a desert planet, an Earth-like planet, and I also have a procedural animated black hole and also an asteroid tutorial, and also a procedural Saturn tutorial. So if you'd like to watch more of my space and planet tutorials, I'll have a link in the video description to my playlist where you can check out those videos. So that'll be it for this video, so I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.